I'm Sam Mullins. I am the new chief. I started back in June as chief of DLEP. Didn't expect to be in this position quite yet in my career, but and I don't want to be the guy following the guy, but this is what's happening. Right now we have 9 staff. We have four inspectors, field inspectors, 3 division engineers, program administrator, and myself. All of our engineers are licensed professional engineers. On the right-hand side here, you can see kind of the regions each inspector covers. These aren't as black and white or as definite in practice, but just based on concentration of facilities, this is kind of what we've come up with. Here are our rules and our laws. Ohio Revised Code 903 and Ohio Administrative Code 90110. I will frequently refer back to these, but you can find these online. They get updated about every 5 years. I'll get into that a little bit later. So here's the size of facilities. We had a presentation earlier discussing what size facility needs to get a permit. Here we go. In Ohio, we have, is that too quick to go through? In Ohio, we have 44 dairy, 6 beef, but we're getting more swine, 95 right now. Poultry is 104. It's kind of been steady for a couple of years. But we're seeing a big uptick in swine, and that is mainly because of that Coldwater, Michigan plant that was constructed a couple years ago. Here you can kind of see this is an old, out-of-date map, but this kind of shows where the concentration is for Ohio. Nothing too surprising here that we don't have a lot of livestock facilities out in southeast Ohio. For a permit summary last year, we had 11 permits to install, which is our construction permit. We also issued 51 permits to operate. Anytime there's a PTI, typically there's an updated PTO that needs to be revised. And then our permits to operate are renewed every 5 years. Currently, we have 35 PTOs in for review. We also have 16 permit to installs in for review, as well as 33 facilities have an open PTI for construction. Right now, active construction, obviously dictated by the weather. We do have some things that can be done while weather is bad, but really, obviously, we're past our construction season. So, permit to install. Again, any facility exceeding those numbers that I quickly went through, they have to have a PTI to expand, or if they're starting from scratch, that PTI has to be submitted to us, reviewed, review process. We target 3 months. Sometimes that can, depending on the complexity of the facility, that can be extended to 6 months or even longer, depending on the compliance with the applicant. These are all the things we're looking at. Now, I don't have time to dive in every single one of these, but just understand that the big part is usually our siting criteria here and our geological exploration, as well as making sure we have a complete set of engineering plans. That takes the bulk of the time when we're reviewing these PTIs, what we're looking for, and things of that nature. We're looking for making sure that the facility itself, the structure itself, meets our specifications, that those specifications are relayed appropriately on the plans. And then from a soils perspective, that we have the adequate soils to either build the type of structure that's being built, or we're meeting permeability specs for an earthen pond or something like that. As I mentioned, PTOs are renewed every 5 years. We do have occasions where facilities may combine, like 2 swine facilities that are in close proximity. They come under one ownership. We typically wouldn't issue a PTI in every case. Sometimes those come in as just a PTO. What we have here are the manure management plan, insect and rodent control, emergency response, operating records. These get inspected at least twice a year by our inspectors. The most intensive part is a manure management plan. This is where nutrient management as well as practice come into play. And these manure management plans are pretty intense when we're looking at them. It's really great to have. Yes, sir?
Back up one slide, Ruth. You put it really fast. Okay. Thank you.
Groundwater monitoring, I kind of skip over that. We don't have a lot of groundwater monitoring or facilities that have groundwater monitoring. Those that do, we are looking at a feature in the soil or some sort of siting criteria that they can use groundwater monitoring to circumvent that. The manure management plan itself, we're looking at the soil data, we're looking at the manure data. It's a lot easier when we have a PTO renewal to build an MMP. For our new facilities or for expanding facilities that don't have existing records, then we can use book values or look at similarly designed facilities to come up with those manure management plans. And then again, I mentioned about routine inspections. The feds recommend once every 5 years. We're doing at least once a year. Most facilities get 2 inspections a year. Some get 3 minimum, just depending on the size, complexity, and compliance history. And then we offer the Certified Livestock Manager credits at these courses. So just to briefly touch this topic here, anybody handling over 4,500 dry tons or 25 million gallons per year has to be a CLM, or if there's a major confined operating feeding facility or concentrating animal feeding facility, which is 10 times the amount that is required to have a permit. The most common one in Ohio is poultry, over 820,000 layers. They have to have a CLM on staff. Okay. Opportunities for improvement. There's always opportunities for improvement, and I do want to disclaim that just because I have these doesn't mean that we're seeing widespread negligence of any of these topics. These are just things that we see commonly, both from CLMs and from permitted facilities. Soil sampling, testing, manure sampling, characterization. I'm probably always going to have some form or variation of these topics in these presentations when I talk about opportunities for improvement. Soil sampling is pretty typical. Every 3 years, one sample, one test can only represent 25 acres or less. Love it to have grid samples, but this is the minimum. We are still seeing issues where land application occurs and a soil test was not consulted. I don't know why we keep seeing the issues. Obviously, there's a timing thing. If we're getting late in the fall or even early in the fall where there's an opportunity to apply, and that facility didn't necessarily particularly have that land in their manure management plan, they may not have the required information. But this is still happening. How many of you have seen this? This is a phosphorus soil test risk assessment procedure. Without this soil test, without the ability of our farms to look at that, they can't do this. And this is one thing that we are pushing, obviously required. I won't get into the specifics of this, but basically, depending on the soil test, that kind of dictates for our permitted facilities what the application rates are. This is based off of 590, but it's modified slightly for the above 100 ppm Bray 1. Manure sampling. Pretty obvious, right? Know what you're applying, make sure that it's representative, yada, yada, yada. But we still have issues with this. This, without naming facility, we've got 2 deep pit swine facilities, both 8-foot, same integrator, a couple counties away. But you can see the variation. Moisture, pretty well lower than we have down here. That's homogeneous, that is not. What's the difference? We have sampling methods. When is it taken? What kind of sampling? Are we looking at a composite versus grab? These types of issues occur more frequently than we would like it, and this is something we've been hammering on our producers as well as our CLMs for at least 2.5 years now, just because of the increase of inconsistent data that we're seeing. Notice over here, P2O5, our phosphate. If we're getting 56.5 pounds per 1,000 gallons versus down here 4.2 or 2.5, you can see why we have these concerns. If there's no agitation, no settling, or no sampling method to kind of account for that stratification in the manure, that's something we're going to continue to push. Nutrient application rates, it's pretty obvious. If you have all the data you need, you have the appropriate soil analysis, you're taking great manure samples, this becomes pretty simple. But again, these are areas where I can push for improvement. The number one thing being that we're not accounting for prior application events. If I go back to that phosphorus soil test risk assessment procedure that we had a couple slides ago, and we have above 40 ppm for A1. That's above what the tri-state would currently recognize as the agronomic limit. Well, they can put on an agronomic limit at a multi-year rate. So if there is swine manure that you're looking at here, Glenn, with your experience, 34.1 pounds per 1,000 gallons for 2 years of manure, or 2 years of phosphate, what do we need there?
You ask your question.
About 4,000 gallons. 4,000 gallons is going to give us about 120 pounds per acre. That's around 2 years for a corn soybean rotation. 4,000 gallons an acre. Some of you are looking at me like that's very difficult to achieve, especially with dragline equipment and also with tanking equipment. But if we're not accounting for that phosphate that was put down at those thresholds, then we're not doing our job with nutrient management. We do have tools that can help. This is not accessible online. This is more of, hey, Sam, or hey, anybody from ODA, I need help with my records. How can I do a 5-year plan? I know you guys can't see this. I don't expect you to see it. But basically what this spreadsheet does for our permitted facilities and our CLMs is allow them to do 5-year plans for one specific field, use this as a record for their manure application, give us the appropriate nutrient balance both on what they've applied and what they can apply from a commercial standpoint. And this takes into account all the different types of regulations that we're looking at. Tri-state fertilizer, well, not regulations, but all the different references and regulations that you can look at. Tri-state fertilizer, NRCS 590, as well as our regs. Soil conditions. Obviously, we cover emergency response and planning. And as we push for cover crops or summertime application, things like that, we've got to kind of revise how we're looking at these soil conditions. We require them to list general conditions. If it's dry, document the residual that's on the field, things of that nature. But the big one that we're missing is the water capacity. How is the soil, what ability does it have at that moment of application to handle additional liquid? Number one thing is, and I heard it said earlier, if your tile outlets are flowing with water, your field is probably already at field capacity for water. So do you go in and put additional liquid manure? How much? I mean, these are, again, things that have to be considered. How many of you have seen this chart? This is straight out of 590 as well. I know, again, hard to read. Hopefully these presentations will be available somewhere else. But basically what we're looking at is, depending on soil type and depending on a qualitative assessment where you're actually handling that soil, looking at if it's crumbling or if it's forming a ball in your hand, things like that, you get a pretty good description of what your available water capacity is, how much volume of manure or liquid, generally based off of water, that soil can handle at that given time. Tile outlets. Again, I always get questioned when I bring this up. Well, how often do I need to? When do I need to? How long after manure application do I need to? And my answer is always like, until that manure is assimilated into the soil, until there's no risk of it leaving that site. And that's a pretty tough task. I understand that. And we don't say, hey, you need to look at your tile outlets every 2 hours or every 3 hours or whatever. To me, it's really based off of what the soil conditions are. I mean, if it's really dry, if there's reduced reduced preferential flow paths, things of that nature, you may be able to reduce it. And then how long afterward also depends on, again, soil conditions, weather, how much you put down. We have seen manure applied at 3,000 gallons an acre cause a discharge. So it is impossible for me to say, just based off knowing on what the application rate is or knowing what the soils are, how often you need to apply. That every farm should have an idea of what they're handling or what they're managing in the field from a drainage perspective, from a manure perspective, and knowing when and how often they need to monitor tile. Setbacks, again, preparation. This is kind of a key for me every time I talk to our producers or our CLMs is prepare. You know, in the off season when you have, like today, if you're not here at training, look at the fields that you're working with. Know where your sensitive areas are. Calculate your application rates beforehand. Have a plan. Right now, these are our two major setback charts here. We're looking at surface application here, and we're looking at surface incorporation within 24 hours or direct injection. Really, the big changes are in your wells, your sinkholes, or your neighboring residences, but there's really no change in what we call our surface waters of the state. It's either you have 35 feet vegetative buffer along that edge of water course, or you apply 100 feet away. It doesn't matter if you're incorporating or injecting. And that's probably the biggest difference, and one that trips, biggest difference from NRCS 590 standards, and that trips up a lot of our CLMs and producers. But we see this still. We see manure application right up against the waterway. I mean, these are at permitted facilities. I will disclaim that as we were going through manure management plans, you know, we're using Google Earth every single day looking at where each field is. I'm going through that plan and find, well, hey, that's in Joe Schmo's farm. What do we have there? We've got a creek going right through here with areas where there's very little vegetation. We've got a house down here that they don't own, a house over here that they don't own. So those are, we can see that. Now, I probably can't do any enforcement off this, but I can at least use this as an educational opportunity to say, hey, you're not following your setbacks. This was an investigation done. Surface application, where I think this was 35 feet away from the house. And this was applied, and you can tell this is definitely not in Northwest Ohio, but you can tell, or you can look at this waterway and say, you know, you're applying right in the middle of that. So those are still, we still see that happening. Another one that is a little subjective based off of inspections or investigations, but surface ponding. This is actually surface ponding right down here. If you can tell this grass, this is surface ponding right next to a waterway. In these areas, again, so we have a somewhat subjective rule that says there you know, adjust application rates to preclude surface ponding. And I've gotten the question before, well, what's surface ponding? And I give them this picture. This is about 36 hours after land application, and we still have manure on the surface, not incorporated. And I don't know how much it has migrated, but basically, due to some of the slope right here, we just had a concentration of manure pool in one area. Record keeping, increasingly more important every single day. Make sure you're recording your soils, your manure tests, your application rates. We have a pretty extensive application form. Now, they're not required, CLMs or permitted facilities, they are not required to use this form here, but they have to have everything on it. So it can be electronic, can be their own version of an Excel spreadsheet, whatever. We have to have this information. Now, I will say that not all of this is applicable to just liquid or solid manure, so they can kind of, those are the parts that they can pick and choose and eliminate. Again, these are just more points of emphasis, making sure that weather forecasts are being consulted, that they're saving them, maintaining them. Stockpiling requirements is really just setbacks, emergency response and planning. I briefly touched a little bit of that, but some of these, if you're handling solid manure, dust, especially poultry litter, is a big one for high-rise barns. And then equipment calibration and nitrogen application rates in the summer months. Each one of these topics I could probably spend half an hour on. Okay. Why you guys are all here. So new regulations. No, not yet. A lot of things are working in the pipeline right now. Number one, we are in the process of going through our own 5-year rule review. There will be some things that we update. There will be some things that we are probably forced to update, and we're going to get a lot of public comments on when we start to work through this process. We have been extending this, buying us about a year, and that's because of our ongoing progress, or lack of progress, I should say, with the US EPA in Region 5 and trying to get MPDS permit delegation for CAFOs. That's been going on. We do expect some changes to our administrative rules. We know there are going to be some changes to our statute if the legislator is accepting what is coming down that pipeline. But we will have MPDES delegation here, I would hope, within the next 24 months. 590 standard. I can't get into too much of the specifics on this, but there is a group of individuals meeting, has been since December, to either revise or clarify or come up with a new revision to the 590 based off of the update to the national 590 standard. The reason I say why could impact DLEP rules is because the bulk of our land application rules are kind of based off of 590. They're modified slightly in some aspects, but for the most part, it is almost a replica. And then the tri-state fertilizer recommendations. These have been in the workings for a couple years now, and I know they're very close to finalizing this between Michigan State, Purdue, and Ohio State, or the Ohio State. The big difference we know coming out is almost a complete conversion over to the Malick Bray testing system, which isn't a big deal with Ohio because the majority of labs in Ohio are using that Malick testing system anyway. What we've been hearing from the public. So this has been constant. This is a constant chatter about permitting medium-sized facilities. So for example, dairies between 699 mature cows. We don't know what type of permit they're looking for. If it's as extensive as ours, I'd basically need to quadruple my staff to be able to cover that workload. So things like this are very impactful, but they will be very, very slow. Reduction of phosphorus soil tests. I'm sure you guys have all heard that. I know some of those discussions go on, but basically we are asked to ban manure application to anything above agronomic rate, or the agronomic test. Required additional treatment processes. We had 4 finisher facilities over 4,800. Well, the smallest was 4,800. The largest was 9,600. And each one of these, we got a comment that they should have a treatment process installed at the facility to where they would meet human waste treatment standards, which I didn't know what exactly that meant because they didn't reference any sort of standard or give me any idea of what they were looking for. But basically, what I understand is they're looking for some sort of secondary treatment, whether that's dewatering or clarifying, and tertiary treatment with this pathogen reduction. Both of those obviously would be a major investment at a facility, but this is what we're starting to hear now. And then requiring minimum acreage per animal unit. This is not a big deal, I don't think, because our manure management plans are inclusive of the manure you're handling, the type of system you're operating, the type of manure it is in terms of solid versus liquid, and existing records. So I can look at a finishing facility and know about what or how many acres they need versus a finishing facility that has a lagoon, and know that those acres are probably going to be much reduced because of the amount of rainwater that's included in that. This right here is based off of what I've been hearing is Ontario's method. Does not account for the type of system you're actually operating.